Hey everyone, Suresh here from SK Talks Games, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to sync your save files across different gaming handhelds using your local network. We're going to use a program called Syncthing to handle the networking part of everything. My handhelds of choice for this video are my Steam Deck, which will be running the latest standalone version of Batocera. I'm also going to be using my TrimUI Smart Pro, which is using the Knulli Gladiator 2 custom firmware, which is a fork of Batocera. So for this to work, the first thing you're going to need is a decent local network. My router is Wi-Fi 6 enabled, and I've found it to be sufficient. You're also going to need a host PC connected to your local network. In fact, you need to make sure that all the devices you're using are connected to the same network. And finally, you need to make sure that you use the same emulator cores across all devices so that in-game saves and save states remain compatible. I'll explain this in more detail later. Just a warning before getting into it. If you have save files that you care about, don't jump in head first using them with this guide because Syncthing might mess things up, especially when you're learning and setting it up for the first time. I suggest creating and using a dummy saves folder to play around with until you have a good understanding of how Syncthing works. Once you're comfortable with using Syncthing, then think about how you might bring your save files into it so you don't lose anything. And of course, as always, make sure you back everything up. If you're not sure how to back up your saves that already exist on your handhelds, I'm going to show you an easy way to do it, which uses your local network, so you won't even have to turn off your device and take out the SD card every time you want to back things up. If you want to do that now, before watching the rest of the video, go to the timestamp you see on the screen, make a backup of your saves, and come back to the beginning of the video. Before we begin, we need to understand a few things about saving games when using emulators. There are basically two ways of saving your game. The first one is the traditional save that you're probably already familiar with, which is when you save your progress inside the game itself. So you might reach a checkpoint and the game may offer you the opportunity to save your progress. This is something that emulators can also do, and when you make a save in game, the emulator will create a file for it. This file can be transferred easily between devices if using the same emulator, and in some cases, it can also be compatible with different emulators. From this point on, I'm going to refer to these types of saves as in-game saves. Another way of saving in emulation is by using save states. The way this works is you can ask the emulator to save your progress at any time you wish, and the emulator will freeze the game at that exact moment, allowing you to go back to it whenever you want. One of the more popular reasons for doing this is right before a big boss fight. You can create a save state so you can keep going back to that point until you beat the boss. Save states work differently to in-game saves that I talked about before, in that they're not as compatible and flexible, and in some cases might even not work with older versions of the same emulator, so they can be pretty fragile and inconsistent. For instance, a save state created by the MGBA emulator does not necessarily work with another emulator like the VBA and such, even when you use the exact same ROM. There are pros and cons to each of these save types, which isn't the point of this video, but I wanted to explain the difference so you can understand the process of what we're doing. This guide is primarily focused on syncing save states rather than in-game saves. The reason for this is so you can have the flexibility of exiting out of a game you are playing at any point you want and be able to pick up exactly where you left off on another device. This is something that is not possible with in-game saves, and so we're going to use save states. Now that we understand different types of save files, we need to talk about how different systems and emulators organize these files. This is because in order for everything to work smoothly, we need to make sure that every device and every emulator we're using can understand the save states we're giving it access to instantly. As I said before, different emulation programs use different ways of storing save files. For example, if you use RetroArch on your PC, you'll find that it creates two separate folders to store your saves. One for in-game saves and another one for save states. The saves folder, which has all your in-game saves, contains a subfolder for every emulator core that's ever been used to create in-game saves. In those subfolders, you'll then find your actual save files for different games. So RetroArch organizes your save files based on the emulator core you use to play your games. That means you can have separate save files in separate save folders for the same game if you've used different emulator cores to play it. You'll find the same thing happening in your save states folder as well. So there'll be a list of all the cores you've used to create save states, and in each of those folders, you're going to find your actual save states for games that use that particular core. Let me give you an example to make this a bit more clear. In your saves and save states folders, you may find a folder for the MGBA core, which will have all your save files for the games you ran using MGBA. If you then decide that you want to use another emulator core, say the VBA, to play the same games with, RetroArch will also create folders for that core where all your save files will be stored, both for in-game saves and save states. And as I mentioned before, in-game save files might be compatible with different emulators, but save states are a different story. These files aren't necessarily compatible, so you can't use a save state created by MGBA with VBA even if you use the same ROM. Anyways, this is how RetroArch organizes your save files. And of course, you can go into the saving settings in RetroArch and change things around as you wish. This is the same thing for, say, RetroArch on Android, etc. Knulli Gladiator 2, which is a fork of Batocera, is a custom firmware that I'm using on my TrimUI Smart Pro, which I want to use with Syncthing. Knulli has the ability to use RetroArch cores to emulate games, but it handles save files completely differently to the standalone version of RetroArch, and unfortunately, you don't have the choice of changing it. You can find the Knulli saves folder in the root directory of your SD card where your ROMs and BIOS files and other things are located. And when you look inside that saves folder, we'll find that Knulli actually organizes save and save state files based on the gaming system rather than the emulator core. So for instance, if I go into my GBA saves folder, I'm going to find every GBA save file that Knulli has created, regardless of the core I use to emulate the game. On top of that, Knulli is a case-sensitive system, so if you have a folder called GBA in capitals, Knulli will not understand it. The folder has to be called GBA all in lowercase. So this is why it is super important to use the same core emulator across all devices that use the same folder structure for storing save files so that they can all understand the files we're feeding them. Now, of course, the standalone version of Batocera that I'm running on my Steam Deck also uses the same folder structure as Knulli when it comes to saves, and that's because Knulli is a fork of Batocera, so there won't be any compatibility issues between my Steam Deck and the devices that use Knulli, which is in my case is going to be the TrimUI Smart Pro. In this guide, I'm not going to be using the standalone version of RetroArch to sync my save files. I only brought it up to explain how saving works in emulation, and especially in RetroArch, seeing as both Batocera and Knulli use RetroArch cores. I'm not saying it's not possible, you're just going to have to play around with RetroArch saving settings to make it function like Knulli and Batocera. If you can achieve this, then you can also use the standalone RetroArch version with Syncthing and the rest of your devices, which means you could use your Android device if you want to, or really any other device that can run RetroArch. I'm going to leave that up to you. There are some guides online to help you do this, and I'll make sure to leave them in the description of this video and also pinned at the top of the comment section so you can easily find them. Anyways, we should now have a better understanding of different save formats, which one we're focusing on, and also why. We also understand different save folder structures and how we're going to organize our files. Next, let's talk about how we're going to get our devices to communicate with each other. The actual process of getting your devices to communicate with each other is quite simple and straightforward, but you do need to decide how you want your devices to do this first. One way is to have devices directly communicate with each other, so like a direct peer-to-peer situation. This setup is fine and works really well, especially if you're only going to sync two devices. But there are some drawbacks when it comes to using this method. Firstly, I've just found that a few times my devices didn't end up communicating properly, which ended up messing up my save files. Also, if you want to sync up more than two devices using this method, things can get a bit messy and complicated, so I don't personally recommend it. And finally, I like being able to have access to my save files on my PC, and that's not possible using the peer-to-peer method. I'll explain this more in a minute. Another method is to use a PC or a Mac as a host server to store all the save files on, and have different devices communicate with the server to get the save files they need when they need it. So how this will work is, say you're playing a game on your TrimUI Smart Pro, and you decide you want to continue playing on your Steam Deck. Once you exit out of the game on the Smart Pro, Knulli will automatically save the game and upload the save file to your host PC. When you pick up your Steam Deck and press play on the game you were playing before, Batocera that's running on the Steam Deck will automatically check with the host PC to see if there's a newer version of the save file for that game, and if that's the case, it will automatically download it onto the Steam Deck and will load you into that save file. This process is repeated for as many devices as you have connected to your host PC, and obviously you should only use one device at a time to avoid duplicated save files. The main reason I prefer using a host PC over the peer-to-peer method that I mentioned before is that it gives me more access and flexibility when it comes to organizing and using my save files. For instance, I can use my save files with another emulator, assuming there are no compatibility issues. I can also just back them up so that I can make sure that they're safe and sound on my PC. I can delete certain save files if they're causing issues on my devices. So yeah, I think it's just a better way of handling things. And considering the fact that you're gonna have to use a PC to set up either of these methods, you might as well set up your PC as a host because you're gonna end up with more perks. So in this guide, I'm going to focus on showing you the second method, but if you're still wanting to set things up using the peer-to-peer method, the process is the same, except you won't have to set up your host PC. You just use it to connect your handles together and get them to sync their respective save files. This is all going to make more sense once you understand the setup process. That was a lot of talking in theory, so with all of that out of the way, we can now get into setting up Syncthing. First, we're going to set things up on our gaming handhelds. Every device that will create save files and tries to sync with the host PC should be set up like this. And obviously, as I mentioned before, I'm using Knulli and Batocera, so if you're using a different system, you're going to need to find the equivalent settings in there. First, press the Start button to get to the Knulli menu. Then go into Game Settings and turn on Auto Save Load under Save States. This is so that when we exit a game, Knulli automatically creates a save state, and later when we launch the game, we will be taken straight into that save state. I leave incremental save states on increment per save. For Show Save State Manager, I pick No, and I do not turn on Quick Resume mode. Next, I'll go all the way down to Per System Advanced Configuration. You will then need to go into every system that you want to use with Syncthing and make sure that it is using the emulator core you like. We need to make sure all our devices use the same emulator core to avoid any incompatibility issues. For example, for Game Boy Advance, I'll pick the Libretro VBA-M core, and I'll make sure to pick the same one on all my other devices. Next, press B or whatever the back button is for you a few times to go back to the Knulli menu, go into Network Settings, make sure to enable Wi-Fi, and connect to your home Wi-Fi. This next bit is optional but massively helpful. So while you're still in Network Settings, change the host name to something that's a bit more recognizable. I just use the name of the device I'm setting up. For example, I use Smart Pro on the TrimUI Smart Pro and Steam Deck on my Steam Deck, and so on. This is going to help us later to recognize our devices easily when we're configuring Syncthing. Next, make sure to write down your device's local IP address, which is at the top of the network settings page. You might need to leave the network settings page after putting in your Wi-Fi details until your device is connected to the network, and then go back to find the IP address. In any case, once you've got the IP address, press B to go back and go down to System Settings, then under Advanced, go into Services, and make sure to enable Syncthing. Another optional thing to do while you're in the Services menu is to enable Samba. Samba allows you to access and browse the contents of the SD card on your device over your local network. This means that you can easily make backups of the save files that already exist on your handheld without having to remove the SD card. And to do this, after enabling Samba, go back a few times and restart the device from the Quit menu. Once you're back in the system and connected to your network, go on your PC, open File Explorer, and click on Network on the left-hand side. The handheld you just restarted should show up as a computer on your network browser. If it doesn't show up, click on the address bar on File Explorer and type in / followed by your device's local IP address or the host name you gave it previously. If you don't change the name, this will be Batocera or Knulli, all in capitals depending on which device you're using. And like I said, it's going to be case sensitive, so make sure you put capital letters. I'll just use the IP address of my TrimUI Smart Pro, which is 192.168.0.208. Then I'll hit enter. You're going to see a file named share. Double click to go into it. Your save file all live inside the saves folder that you will see on your screen. Along with everything else that lives on the SD card, make a copy of your saves folder if you wish, and you can also add ROMs or BIOS files or cheats or anything else that you want. Just make sure they go in the correct folders. Now, this process is exactly the same for Batocera, so if you're using it on any of your devices, you can use Samba to work with the contents of your SD card over your local network. Anyways, repeat the same process for every device that you want to connect to Syncthing, and then restart your device. Once you have all your devices set up correctly, you're ready to start the process of setting up Syncthing on your PC. So let's do that next. Now that all our devices are set up and ready to go, We need to set things up on the host PC. So on your PC, create a folder that you're going to use to store all your save files in. I'm going to name mine saves, but you can use whatever you like. Take note of where on your PC that file is located. You're going to need it later. I'm just going to put mine in C drive. Also, make sure to remember the way you spell the name of this folder, as Knulli and Batocera are case-sensitive systems, so any mismatches will cause problems. Next, open your web browser and go to syncthing.net and click on Downloads. Download the version of Syncthing you want, depending on your operating system. For Windows, I'm going to be using the Syncthing Windows setup. This will take you into Syncthing's GitHub page. Look under Releases, download the latest version of Syncthing, and install it. And if you face any security permission errors, just approve them. Click Next a few times until you get to select additional tasks. I highly recommend allowing Syncthing to run when Windows starts, so your devices will have access to the host PC at all times and you don't accidentally mix up your save files. During installation, you'll get asked if you want to create Windows firewall rules for Syncthing. Click yes. Once the installation process is complete, Syncthing will launch in a web browser. Just click on Advanced, then click on Accept the Risk, and then Continue. If Syncthing doesn't start automatically after installation for you, you can access it by typing localhost 8384 into your web browser. You can also type in 127.0.0.1.8384. It's going to take you to the same page. I'll just use localhost because it's easier to remember. Once you're in the Syncthing configuration page, you'll get asked if you want to report your usage anonymously. I said no, but you pick whatever you want. You'll also notice a green box at the top of the page that asks you to set a user and password. I tend to ignore this part because I'm the only person who has access to my local network. Now, I'm not saying I'm a networking expert or anything, but I feel comfortable about not using a username and password here, so I'll just press OK. You can and you should set this up if you like. In any case, while in the Syncthing configuration page, you can create a new folder that will be used to sync saved files across all your devices. So click on Add Folder, and under the folder label, give your folder a name. This is optional, but I'll just use the same as before, which was saves. Next, under folder path, you're going to put the path to the save folder we made previously on our host PC. For me, that's going to be the saves file I made on my C drive. If you're not sure on how to get the path to your folder, go back to the folder you created before, right-click on it, and then click on Copy as Path. Now go back to the Syncthing configuration page and paste the copied path under folder path. Just make sure to remove the quotation marks from the beginning and end of the path address. And at this point, our save folder is ready to be used. But I also did a couple of other things to make my experience a little bit better. So these steps are optional, but I highly recommend them. Click on the File Versioning tab, then under the File Versioning drop-down menu, pick Simple File Versioning. Next, under Keep Versions, type in 5. This way, Syncthing will keep the 5 latest versions of a save file. I use this as a way of protecting my save files in case something happens to them on one of my devices. There's a lot you can do here, for example, which type of file versioning you want to use, so have a read through the documentation by clicking on Help and see how or if you would like to set this up for yourself. The next optional thing I recommend you do is increase the full rescan interval. This is so my PC will look for changes in the saves folders across my devices more often. By default, Syncthing on my PC will look for any changes that take place in any of these folders, and in theory, it should just work automatically as changes take place. But I've found that sometimes that doesn't happen as quickly as I like, and that's why I changed the full rescan interval to 10 seconds down from 3600, which is the default setting, and equals to an hour. So by default, Syncthing will do a full rescan every hour, but like I said, I prefer mine to happen more quickly, and I found that 10 seconds is generally a good spot. I highly suggest you play around with this to find what works best for you. Once you're done setting up your saves folder on Syncthing, click on Save, and your folder should show up on the configuration page under Folders. Next, we're going to connect our devices to our host PC so they can access the saves folder we created. If you followed my advice previously and gave your device a recognizable name in network settings, this next step should be pretty straightforward. Just as a reminder, I'm syncing 2 handheld devices, so my Steam Deck and my TrimUI Smart Pro, by allowing them to access a central saves folder on my PC. These handhelds won't speak to each other directly and will only use the folder I've designated as my saves folder on my PC. To make this process as smooth as possible, I'm going to keep the Syncthing central configuration page, that localhost 8384 page that we were working on previously, on one side of my screen, and on the other one, I'll jump into the individual Syncthing configuration page for each of the handhelds I'm using. So you can see on the left-hand side, I have my Syncthing configuration page for the host PC, and on the right side, I have a blank browser which I'll use for configuring Syncthing on each device. Let's start with the Steam Deck. The local IP address for my Steam Deck is 192.168.0.15. Remember, we wrote this down when we were connecting our devices to our home Wi-Fi. So on the blank web browser on the right side, I'm going to type in 192.168.0.15.8384 and then hit enter. This should take me to the Syncthing configuration page for the Steam Deck. The first thing we're going to do is connect the Steam Deck to the host PC. Back on the Syncthing configuration page for the PC, inside the This Device box, there's a line that says Identification. Opposite to Identification, you'll find a bunch of letters and numbers, and it should be clickable. Click on the code, which will reveal the unique device identifier for the device you're configuring. So this is the code Syncthing uses to identify your host PC, and every other device that uses Syncthing will have its own unique identifier. Back on the Syncthing configuration page for the Steam Deck, under Remote Devices, click on Add Remote Device. For device ID, paste the code you copied previously. Now, Syncthing does automatically recognize devices that are attempting to connect to its network, and if you're working with one or two devices, this process shouldn't be too complex. Things become problematic when you start adding in more than two devices because identifying them can get a bit complicated since it's hard to tell which device is which by just looking at the codes. In any case, we've made sure we're connecting the Steam Deck to my PC by using the correct identifier code. Next, under device name, give the device you're adding a name. If you followed my recommendation previously, you shouldn't have to worry about this because if you leave this part blank, Syncthing will use the host name you gave your device before in network settings. And worst case, if that doesn't work, you can always change the name of the device later. So for now, I'm going to leave device name blank and press the save button. Next, we'll go back to the Syncthing configuration page for the host PC. That's on the left side of my screen. You'll see a notification has shown up telling you a new device is trying to connect. Click on Add Device. Under device name, the host name we gave our Steam Deck in network settings should show up. And if for whatever reason it doesn't, change the device name to Steam Deck or something more recognizable so you can find it easier later. Then press save. Steam Deck should now show up under remote devices. Next, we're going to give the Steam Deck access to our saves folder that lives on the host PC. So in the Syncthing configuration page for the host PC, I'm going to click on the folder we created before and click on Edit. Go into the Sharing tab and tick the box that's next to Steam Deck, then press save. Next, go back to the Syncthing configuration page for the Steam Deck. You'll have a notification saying that your host PC wants to share a folder with you. Click on Add. In the General tab, under Folder Path, type in user data /saves. This is the path that Batocera uses on the Steam Deck to store your save files on the SD card. And remember again, Batocera is a case-sensitive system, so make sure you type everything in lowercase with no spaces. Next, click on Advanced and change full rescan interval to 10 or whatever number you prefer. This will essentially force Batocera to sync your save files from the Steam Deck to your host PC after 10 seconds of exiting a game, which I find to be the sweet spot. It means you'll never accidentally not upload your latest saves, which will ensure you always have the latest version of your saves on your PC. Anyways, click on Save, and your save files between your host PC and the Steam Deck are now in sync. If you already had some save files on your Steam Deck, they should start appearing in the saves folder that you created on your PC. This is a good way to test and see if you've set everything up correctly. Next, we're going to repeat the same process for the TrimUI Smart Pro. We'll keep the Syncthing configuration page for the host PC on the left, and on the right, we'll type in the local IP address for the TrimUI Smart Pro, followed by 8384. Click on Add Remote Device, and paste in the Syncthing device ID for your host PC, then click Save. Back on the Syncthing configuration page for the host PC, click on Add Device that's inside the new device notification. Give the device a name so it's easily recognizable later if you wish, and click Save. While still on the Syncthing page for your host PC, click on Saves folder under the Folders section and click on Edit. Go into Sharing, and next to the new device you added, tick the box. For me, that's Smart Pro, then click Save. Now, go back to the Syncthing configuration page for the TrimUI Smart Pro, and inside the new folder notification, click on Add. At the bottom, inside the folder path text box, type in user data /saves, all in lowercase and no spaces. Go to Advanced and change the full rescan interval to 10 seconds, then click Save. If you've done everything correctly, Syncthing will say up to date in green next to all your connected devices and folders under your host PC's configuration page, which is a good sign that everything is connected and working as intended. You can now test your new setup by playing a game on any of your devices that are connected to your host PC, exit out of the game, give it a few seconds, maybe 20 or 30 to be sure, then pick up your other device, launch the same game using the same core, and see if it will take you back to the exact point you left it at. Now, before we finish up this section, I'll just say this. Things will break, so please make sure you make regular backups of your saves. I've been using this system for a few weeks now with multiple different devices, and for the most part everything has worked really well. But I have had issues as well, and I've definitely lost save files and game progress. One thing I've found that has helped a lot in troubleshooting when things go south is using the recent changes feature, which is found under remote devices. This page allows you to see what's happened to the shared folder on your host PC. So things like which devices accessed it, at what time, and exactly what did it do. So if you have any issues, I highly recommend you look through these recent changes to see which device is the culprit and what is happening. Just like any other piece of software, Syncthing is not perfect, and it's important to know what it does well and where it falls short. I'll talk about a couple of issues and shortcomings that I've personally experienced. Firstly, I wouldn't use Syncthing on its own as a backup solution. You could use a Google Drive folder that also lives on your PC, and that could work as a backup solution for your save files, but I would not trust Syncthing on its own. Next, for Syncthing to work, you have to be connected to your home network. So if you're outside, you won't be able to sync your save files. There is a way to connect your save files to a cloud service like Google Drive so you can sync your save files on the go, but that requires the use of rclone and SSH, which is a deeper, more involved process. Let me know if you'd be interested in that and I'll make a video about it. And lastly, as I explained before, things can and will break. A simple act of an emulator core getting updated on one device and not on another can cause incompatibility issues. So please make sure you make regular backups of your saves to avoid headaches later. On a more positive note, Syncthing can also be used for other things when it comes to organizing your gaming handheld and the contents on them. This is because you can sync any folders across your devices. For example, you can make your ROMs folders to sync across all your devices or the devices of your choice. You can do things like adding new ROMs into a dedicated folder, and then all your devices that are synced to that folder will all automatically pick up those ROMs. This could work like a curated ROMs folder where you only put in games that you want to play and then change them around as you finish or get bored with them. I know personally I can get quite overwhelmed when I open the library of games on my handhelds and get faced with a million options. So this could be a good way of eliminating that problem and actually going through your backlog. You could even set up cheat files or music or video files to get synced across your devices. The possibilities are endless. Let me know of any other creative ways that you're using Syncthing for in the comments below. I'm interested to see how other people are using it. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of this video. It has been one of the most comprehensive guides I've ever made. It took me a very long time to research, trial, and compile all this information together and then turn it into a presentable video, and honestly, I thoroughly enjoyed the process. So if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Enjoy using your save files across all your devices, and I'll see you in the next one.